What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today I have a special episode for everyone. I am going to be interviewing the designer of the WWF Wrestling Buddies by Tonka, Stefanie Eskander, and the video on this interview is much lower quality than you may be used to on the channel. However, if you look past that, it is packed with information, the complete history of the WWF Wrestling Buddies from inception to the very, very end. She goes over items and products that she was developing that no one's even known about, products that we have little information on, things that she forgot about after 30 years, drawings that she found that nobody's ever seen. This interview is packed with information if you're a fan of wrestling toys or wrestling buddies. Check it out. So just look past the low quality stuff, and I think you're really gonna like this one. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Fig Heel YouTube channel. And today I have a special episode for everybody because today we are talking with the WWF Wrestling Buddies toy designer, Stefanie Eskander. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks. It's really nice to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking so much. You've been telling me so much. And every time we talk, I tell you, like, you show me some things that just blow my mind. So I'm really excited to do this interview. Actually, last night, I could not sleep. I was just like up all night just thinking about this because it's so exciting to me as a wrestling fan and a wrestling toy fan. And I mean, I have my buddies right next to me.
Oh, Jake
It's
the Snake.
yeah, it's just so exciting because this is such a big part of my childhood. I was looking at your page at your other designs, and I noticed that your son is around my age. I'm 32. I'm sure he's around there, and
Right.
so I was at the prime age for these things. These were everything to me because at that time these were the same size as me. I loved action figures, but these were the same size as me. And everybody in this collecting world that's in the same age range as me, we have the same connection to these because it wasn't done with previous wrestling merchandise at the time. So this was huge. So what I'd like you to do is just go through your whole process, how you got to Tonka, how you designed the buddies. It's a really interesting story, and I would love for you to share it with everybody.
It's kind of funny because I'm probably one of the last toy designers on the face of the earth that you would think would design wrestling toys, because my career has been in girls' toys, designing dolls, designing cute things, Cabbage Patch Kids and Cupcake Dolls and Rainbow Bride and all kinds of girly things. And but I'll tell you a little bit of the story about how I came to come to Tonka, how I came to design the Wrestling Buddies. In December of 1989, I was working at Hasbro. I was in their Play School division that last year and designing dolls, Dolly Surprise, and all kinds of cute little preschool dolls. And I had a friend who was who had been the head of boys' toys marketing at Play School. And he left the company and went to Tonka and became the VP of Boys Toys Marketing at Tonka. And he recruited me to come out to Tonka because they needed a doll person, a girl's designer. And so, like 3 days after Christmas, 1989, I went to Minnesota and lived in a hotel for a while, left my husband and three kids back in Rhode Island. And it was bitter cold, Minnesota, December. And so I started work at the very end of December. A lot of toy companies are closed down between Christmas and New Year, but Tonka wasn't. So I came in there, I think it was December 28th. And my guess is the very first day that I was there, although I don't have a calendar entry for that, my very first day that I was there, I was brought into a meeting of the Boys Toys marketing people, including this gentleman, and asked me if I'd be willing to try my hand at drawing some wrestlers. or this new line that they were bringing in. And so I do have my 1990 calendar, and I kept date books of my career for the most part, filled in, everything that I was doing in my toy career. And it's really been helpful to try to put all this together because it's been 30 years since I did all this. So anyway, I have the very day after New Year, so January 2nd, 1990. That was my official launch date of doing Wrestling Buddies. By the next day, I had already designed Hulk Hogan. And so by the end of that first week, so I'd only been at Tonka for one full week, I had done my preliminary design work for all 4 of the first wave of Wrestling Buddies. And so it was really fun. I knew that I'd started quickly, but it wasn't until I went and looked at my date book that I discovered, oh my gosh, yeah, I really hit the ground running. But what's really funny is that the Wrestling Buddies didn't start out as WWF. You might have heard the story about these nebulous wrestlers, and I have nothing to do with the invention of the Wrestling Buddies. It was not my concept. It was not my idea. But they had been around the company for a while, and long before I got there. And the boys team, the boys marketing team, had tried really hard to sell this concept. But it wasn't until they caught the eye or got the attention of the WWF and managed to sign the license, which I imagine happened before I got there. I don't have any kind of access to the dates on that. But once the WWF signed on board, then the company was fully on board, and I just started in. And they asked me, I think because I was an illustrator, in addition to being a toy designer, even though I came in to do dolls, I had had so much experience drawing different things, and it was kind of like, well, why not wrestlers? And so I remember the first day, the marketing guy brought me in a pile of wrestling magazines. And I sat at the desk, and it was just like, oh my gosh, this is just a whole new world. But I, of course, had heard of Hulk Hogan, but I don't believe I'd ever heard of any of the other wrestlers. It wasn't in my radar. I had 2 boys. My older son was at that time about 10, and my younger son was about 4. Let's see, he must have been 4, almost 5. So they were little, he was a little guy.
Okay.
But my older son wasn't really interested in wrestling, so I really didn't have a clue. And so anyway, they asked me to design these first group of wrestlers, and so I got busy and I started drawing. The problem was that they wanted to introduce these at Toy Fair, which is in the middle of February. This is the beginning of January. So we had to design and make not only prototypes to show for Toy Fair, but we had to have prototypes that were made for the commercial shoots, for all kinds of promotional catalog shoots and things like that. And let me tell you, that was really stressful because they kind of decided they wanted me to do it. So fortunately, my family had stayed behind in Rhode Island, so I was by myself, so I had my weekends free. So I spent that next pretty much month on working on the wrestlers, a lot of it on my own time in the hotel room that I was staying at, coloring and markering these wrestlers and trying to get them ready. But I was also working on girls' toy lines, on dolls and things. So it wasn't like I was only doing wrestlers.
Yeah.
So it was a huge responsibility. It was a team effort, but we were able to get the first 4 wrestlers approved by the WWF, samples made, prototypes colored, and that was a whole process, and ready. And then Toy Fair came in February, and they were, fairly well received. Not blockbuster, it wasn't Cabbage Patch Kids, but it was fairly well received. And then I had to spend the next several months, probably the next 6 months or so, getting ready for the release of these products. I don't know how many of your fans know a little bit about toy development, but developing a plastic toy takes a lot longer than developing a soft toy. And that's because of the time that's involved with making molds, and that's very time consuming. And most of the plastic toys are manufactured in China, and so then that also requires shipping, and that could take long periods of time for things to get from China. They're not usually flown, they're usually put on a ship and sailed across the ocean.
Okay.
And so it takes a lot longer. Soft goods, what we call soft toys, we call them soft goods, have a much shorter lead time. And so these were manufactured in the United States. They were actually printed in New Jersey and then assembled, I believe, in Minnesota, where Tonka was located. And so it was a much shorter lead time. But there was still a lot of preparation work and things that, as a plastic toy designer, I had never done before in the development of this.
Yeah.
So,
So
go ahead.
I just want to clarify, because the prototypes that you were working on, as you told me, they were actual cloth, the cloth goods prototypes that you were drawing on with markers.
Yeah, it's an interesting process. So I worked really closely with a woman who was what we call a soft goods engineer. And her job was to create the actual physical form of the buddy. And that had, a lot of that had been established before I even got there. It was that big bulbous head and the arms, right. I mean, that form was pretty consistent for all of the buddies with slight changes. She was really interested in adding some dimension. Originally, they were kind of flat. She wanted to add the nose, the seam across the head, which allowed a nose to be inserted, and so she worked really hard on that. So what her team would do is they would sew these white buddy, what we call gray goods, out of white tricot fabric, really heavy, like a double knit fabric. And then my job was to draw on that and create the actual form. So what I would do is I'd take it with pencil. I would draw the features, which I'd already done sketches. They'd already been approved, right? So I'm not just designing them on the figure. I knew what the shape of the figure was. Then I would do drawings on paper that would get approved by our marketing team, our development team, and then that would go to Connecticut, Stamford, Connecticut, to the WWF, and they would have to approve everything we did. Okay, so I would take these things and I would draw with pencil on it, and then I had to figure out what kind of markers to use, because all markers are different. And so I discovered that Prismacolor markers were the best. They were alcohol based and they didn't make the fabric hard. But the fabric just sucked the life out of these markers. So you would be drawing, you'd have a box of fresh markers. By the time you were halfway done with the buddy, your markers were all dried up because that fabric had kind of ruined them. So we would order markers by the box full. And then I did most of it, but I did have other people helping me. I would draw the outlines of the figures, and the first ones I did all by myself. And then I had a team of other designers and freelancers that would come in and they would help do some of the coloring. And then I did all the finished work. I did all the lettering. I did, like the belts, the championship belts, the details and things like that. So it was a really big process. And I remember sitting in my hotel room with a pile of these white buddies, and I'm just by myself, just coloring and drawing these prototypes and getting ready for Toy Fair. And so that's how we did the first one. Actually, that's pretty much how we did all of them, even after the first batch.
Yeah, it's so crazy, because as somebody who's not in the toy industry, but I love everything about just toys, even as an adult. I never looked at these and thought, oh, for the prototype to really get the ball rolling on these, they would have been hand drawn on a blank buddy. That's just so cool to me. But so we have some pictures of those prototypes, which I'll plug into the video. But so wave one, do you want to discuss wave one? Right.
So wave one was, of course, the Incredible Hulk, $1 Million Man, Macho King, and Ultimate Warrior. So those were the first four, and those were all they were all designed within the first 2 weeks of January of 1990. And then the prototypes were made, and then those first four were presented at Toy Fair. And the first commercial was shot. You probably all seen that famous commercial with the houses all,
Yeah.
shaking, and the dad's up, goes upstairs and he's playing with the wrestling buddies with the kids. And I think that it was monumental. I think once the commercial was released, of course, that would have been a little bit later in the year.
Yeah.
The commercial would have been released later in the year. The fourth quarter, which is, all important in the toy industry, is when everything has to be done, because that's when your Christmas sales start in September. So pretty much everything has to be done. And between January and September, when the toys were released and started to be sold, there were a lot of steps that we had to take to make soft toys that I wasn't familiar with, that I'd never had to deal with in doing plastic toys. And one of them is the fact that we did this domestically. And so I was responsible for interviewing and finding and helping. I mean, I was one of the people, but it was kind of my job to find the printer to print the fabric, to find the graphics firm that could create the films, because these were printed on big giant presses. So it's called sublimation printing. We had to prepare the artwork to be then transferred onto film separation so that the printer could do it. And then we did have another printer that could do some limited small runs of some of the buddies for some of the prototyping, but just one at a time, because they didn't have the kind of press that was set up for production rolls. So in addition to finding a local design firm that were able to take my drawings and create the films, then we had to find a company that could make the fabric, because it was a knit fabric. So we had to find a knit mill and a sublimate that could do sublimation printing. And we found that in Newark, New Jersey. So the soft goods engineer and I made 2 or 3 trips to New Jersey to supervise the printing. But before that, one of the things I wanted to mention is, another part of the process was, okay, so I had these white samples and I would draw right on the buddy. After I drew it and everybody looked at it and said, yeah, that's good, then we would have to take it apart and lay all the pieces down flat. And then I would take tracing paper and I would draw over it and I would refine it and make it perfect, so that the lines were just the way I wanted, and of course we didn't have computers or anything back then. Everything was hand done. But it would be drawn on the actual pattern piece, because
Wow.
we would, enlarge the pattern pieces were all laid out. So every arm, every nose, every headscarf, everything was all drawn on a separate piece. Then that was sent to a graphics firm locally in Minneapolis. Then they would take my artwork and transfer it, to a photo process where they would create films that could then go to the press. We might do some refining after that. Then we would send them off to New Jersey to have all that yardage printed. And then they were sent somewhere else. And honestly, I can't remember now where they were assembled. But this was all done in the US. So that was kind of a cool thing.
That is
so
very
this
cool.
was a whole process for me. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned the commercial, because in the wrestling collectibles world, we all remember those commercials with the bed post is like the ring with the sheets tied to it. And it's just so cool. And the thing about that was you told me something very, very interesting last night that I would like to touch on a little bit. And that was that in your notes, you found a note that said to develop a wrestling mat for kids to be able to wrestle with these on.
Yeah, I did. I don't think it lasted very long.
Okay.
So I worked on it for a couple of weeks. Honestly, I don't have any memory of it. I don't remember. I did write in my notes that I went out shopping at toy stores to find play mats. We do a lot of what we call competitive shopping, where we go out and we buy toys that are competitors' things. So I bought some mats. I did some sketches, but I don't think it went any further than the concept stage, because I I have notes about it over a period of a couple of weeks, but I don't have any. I really don't have any recollection of what I
Yeah.
did. I kind of wish I did, but it seems to me in my memory that there was going to be some sound involved. So, some kind of a deluxe mat that would have had maybe some wrestling grunts and groans and things
Yeah.
like that. But other than that, I wish I could tell you more, but would have been fun, huh?
Absolutely. And like, just that blew my mind when you told me that. And the electronic part makes sense because following toy companies that have tried to recreate these wrestling buddies often have included sounds in them. And usually if you put the buddy on the back, it'll do like a 1, 2, 3, like to pin. So I'm wondering if maybe that was one of the sounds they would have probably added to it. But yeah, very cool. So looking at wave 1, and you showed me the picture of your son holding the Hulk Hogan prototype. It's
Right.
There's very slight refinement to it, but it's almost as if your prototype, you did great on the prototype, that was almost exactly what went to the store shelves, with very fine things like the lettering I saw that you updated, and very cool. But wave 2, do you want to talk about wave 2?
Right. So wave 2 was interesting because we weren't sure exactly who we were going to do for wave 2. Now, also, I want you to understand that none of these decisions were my decisions to make as to which wrestlers were picked. This was all entirely came from Boys Marketing and the VP of Boys Design. And so they came up with the ideas. I basically was a wrist, what we call a wrist, somebody who does the work. So I didn't really have any input, but I did, I did look at what they were doing, and the very first recollection, or the very first notation I have in my calendar of the second wave, was that we were going to do, this was in July. So this is before the first wave had actually hit the shelves. We're already working on the second wave, right? Was that we were going to do Sergeant Slaughter. And so I started working on Sergeant Slaughter. So that's something that I don't think very many people know. So I do have notes of working on a Sergeant Slaughter prototype for a while. I do remember that there were problems because of his hat, because of the configuration was so much different than the other wrestlers, and try to figure out how we were going to create his hat. But I don't recall, I don't have any images of the prototypes that I created.
And what's funny is that around that time he was still wearing the sergeant hat. I would say
right.
maybe about a year or two later, he started wearing a helmet, which would have been much more conducive to the design of your buddies.
Yeah, that's right. I do remember that. And it's possible that we knew that. I'm sure that the WWF gave us updates as soon as they received them of costume changes. And in fact, I'm going to talk about a costume change that happened in the second wave. But right after I started working on Sergeant Slaughter, the next one I started working on was the Big Boss Man. And I had my original sketch for Big Boss Man, but I sold it. But you can find it. I posted it on my Instagram account. I sold my prototype and my drawing. And it's funny because I do get a lot of contacts from people who want to buy my prototypes. I have to say my son Alec, who is a huge fan of my stuff, he's the one that you were talking about that's holding the prototype. I've kind of promised him some of my stuff, so he'll probably inherit a few of my pieces that I don't know. I hate to sell things. I know some people just love to sell them. I know why people like to buy them. It's really a piece of history. But for me, it's kind of like, well, when it's gone, it's gone. I can't replace it. It's not like I can go on eBay and buy one of the toys that I designed. I can't go on eBay and buy back my drawings. So I've been really reluctant to let anything go.
And talking to you, I can just tell that you have a lot of pride in your work. And these, I guess to some toy designers, it's kind of like, oh, this is my work. I did this, blah, blah, blah. I'm done with it. I could just tell that, this is your legacy. And I went through your social media, and I saw not just the wrestling stuff, all the stuff that you design. You take so much pride in it. You've released books, and we'll talk about that at the end. But like it just shows that this is way beyond like a job to you. And so I totally understand what you're saying.
Right. Well, thank you. We were talking just a minute ago about changes and updates and things from the WWF, and kind of a good example of that is Jake the Snake. I actually have, I'm going to reach over and grab, I have my original, can you see it? I have my original drawing of Jake the Snake.
Wow.
This is dated September 1990. So, but you'll notice that his snake looks different and his outfit looks different than the way he eventually looked. And this was approved by the WWF, and I'm not a wrestling expert, so I could be mistaken in this. And if your followers have more up-to-date information, great. But from my memory, what happened was we developed him to look like that. We did the final artwork and it was approved. And then months later, we're talking probably in April of 1991, the WWF came back and requested design changes to Jake the Snake. And so then I spent the next week or so changing him to be like the one that you have, with all of the scales on his, see his boots have all the scales. The snake has matching scales. And of course, that was tedious to draw, all those scales. But and then to try to make it so they would match when it was put together, it was kind of hard. But so Jake had some major changes. So the three that we started then were Sergeant Slaughter and Big Boss Man and Jake the Snake. And then at some point, Sergeant Slaughter was nixed. And I don't know whether he fell out of favor, in the wrestling community, whatever happened, a decision was made to drop him. And then we added the tag team, the Legion of Doom. And so that became the second wave of wrestlers. But, something really tragic, happened. This, the Wrestling Buddies came out in the fall of 1990. In January of 1991, it was announced that Tonka had been sold to Hasbro. And so that was really a shock to us that this had happened. Tonka was actually the owner of Kenner. It was Kenner, Parker, Tonka. Kenner Brothers, Kenner, Parker Brothers, and Tonka. And Tonka was actually kind of the owner or the head of these companies, but they were the smallest. They were smaller than Kenner. And so Hasbro bought Tonka, Kenner, Parker in January 1991. However, we continued on life as usual. We were told that everything was going to be hunky-dory. They were going to leave us alone. I mean, we were famous for Tonka trucks, and we didn't think that Hasbro was interested in trying to open up a truck division in Rhode Island. And so we were told that, things would stay the same. And we had a real successful line with the Wrestling Buddies. Also, I was working on the Cupcakes line of dolls for girls, and that was hugely successful. We were pretty comfortable that they were going to leave us alone. But within a few months, I think it was May, they announced that we would be shut down. And honestly, that was just really, really tough to take. So we continued until the end of the year. But starting in about May, we started turning things over to Hasbro. Hasbro executives started coming into our offices. We sat down in a meeting with Kirk Bazigian, who was the one who introduced the Wrestling Buddies in the Toys That Made Us. Many of you have seen that. Kirk's a great G.I. Joe expert, and I had known him at Hasbro. So we began the process of turning things over to Hasbro in May and June. But we were continuing to develop. And also, incidentally, I had mentioned that in 1990, before even, very shortly after the first wave was designed, we began designing a line of Marvel buddies. They were called Power Pals. I did Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk. So I was working with Marvel in addition to working with the WWF and developing these characters. And so that was, creating wrestling. Behind me, I have a Spider-Man wrestling buddy that you can see. That's a hand-drawn prototype. It's kind of, you can see the marker. And you can also see I have a Legion of Doom, one of the prototypes for Legion of Doom behind me too. That's also one of my hand markered prototypes. So anyway,
that's a hand-drawn one? That's a hand-drawn? Very cool.
The Hulk is production. Actually, the Hulk is pre-production. It's one of the first samples that came back from China. That came back from the manufacturer. We didn't have this done in China. And I actually signed his butt for some odd reason. I guess he's kind of a collectible because he's what we call a first shot.
Yeah.
But yeah, the tag team guy and the Spider-Man are both hand-drawn prototypes.
Yeah, and I told you I had a funny story about the Legion of Doom. It's the only, I have all of the wrestling buddies, the only set I don't have. And it was so hard to find in the stores. Now, you have to remember, I was probably 4 or 5 years old at the time. And I remember being in Sears at the mall with my mom, and I was just bored in the store. So I was acting up, running around, running through clothes and just, being a pain. And she kept telling me to stop. I kept doing it, bothering my sister. She kept telling me to stop. Finally, she says, "That's it. We're leaving." Grabs me by the wrist, walks me out of Sears. We passed the Legion of Doom. And I said, "Mom, look," she said, "Nope, you're not getting them." And we never saw them again.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, it's my fault. I deserved it. It's funny because I have a vivid memory of that. And she laughs about it. She's like, "Well, you shouldn't have been acting up. Maybe you would have got him. Maybe you wouldn't have." But you showed me the drawings, not the hand-drawn prototypes, but the drawings of Legion of Doom and the drawing of Big Boss Man. And your initial drawings are slightly different than the production. Would you like to talk about that?
Sure. It's the approval process is complex, meaning when you're drawing, when you're trying to take a real person and make it into a kind of a cartoon, and I'm not a caricaturist. And so this, it's kind of a struggle to take something and simplify it and capture all the nuances. So of course you start with a sketch and then you refine it. Next you add some color to it, but you have to show it to your boss. Your boss shows it to her boss. Then he shows it to his boss. You go through an approval process. Everybody's pretty happy with it. Then you have to show it to Vince McMahon, and the WWF has to approve it. So many things have changed. I do have these are actually on tissue, on tracing paper. My original sketches.
Wow. And his makeup and his pants have a different design than the production version.
And then here's the other one.
Very cool.
Dated January 1991. So these are my original drawings. And so, what would happen was I would draw it. I would not make an actual prototype for approval. This would all be done with drawings, but it would have to go up the chain of command. And then, WWF would say, "Oh, well, the outfit has changed," or, "Oh, can you change this detail? Can you, his mask looks different," or, "Can you add something?" Or, there's just always going to be changes. That's the process. In fact, as I was going through my calendar, looking at, the dates that I had done all these things, I was amazed at how many times I was taking the film. So we're already going into production with the films that are used to print the fabric, and I'm modifying something. And I don't remember exactly, but, it might have been a color, or it might have been, just a line here or a line there that we were making changes right up until it would go to press. And then with Jake the Snake, we had started the process, had designed the films when the WWF came to us and said, "There's a costume change, and so we need to redo that." So that, that's pretty common.
Yeah. And the other costume change that you showed me was the Big Boss Man.
Oh, he didn't have any sunglasses on my
Yeah.
first one. My first drawing, he had chest hair.
Yeah.
I love the little chest hair coming up, and he didn't have any sunglasses. And then, of course, he wore sunglasses. So they asked me to add that.
Yeah. And it's funny that you said that it's difficult to take, this larger in life entity, these wrestlers, these superstars, and make them a simplified caricature, basically a cartoon doll. And I think you did a great job capturing that, but it makes sense because you have to figure out what makes this Jake the Snake rather than just a guy with a mustache. And I think you did a great job capturing that. Pretty much everybody does. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, you told me about last night, and you sent me that picture, was you started developing another Hulk Hogan. A head, at least. You started.
Right. And this is a mystery. And I've actually sent a picture of this to several people who've followed me or who know that I've done this, and nobody seems to really know. And I cannot remember, but I do have something. As I mentioned before, one of the things that we would have to do was we would draw something on the prototype, right? And then we would take it apart, and then I would redraw it on the actual pattern, sewing pattern. So I have a drawing of Hulk Hogan's head with a new bandana design on the pattern. So I know I had to have drawn it at Tonka, because after I left Tonka, I would not have had access to the patterns anymore. And I did find a note that said that I did in August of 1990. So that was after this is after they were already in production. So I think it would have been for a revision, a refresh of the line. But nobody seems to know anything about that Hogan headscarf. And so I would like to know if that was something that, I don't remember if the WWF must have requested it, because I would not have done that on my own. So I just don't know if that was something that he toyed with that didn't go over, and so we never made the change. But it's in my files, and it's drawn on the pattern, which I think is interesting because that's the only drawing I have in my files that's actually drawn on the production pattern that we used for the Wrestling Buddies. So it's kind of interesting, but it's a little bit of a mystery what it is.
It's very interesting, especially because, like I was telling you, he didn't wear Hogan on his headband until years later. I would say about 3-4 years later, 1994, when he went to WCW, a different wrestling company. But this morning I was just going through things, and I was looking at that picture, and I was like, it reminds me, not completely, but there was a company that WCW had draw up prototypes. They never were released, prototypes of Wrestling Buddies. And I believe they were called Pillow Pals, or something along those lines. And I believe the Hulk has Hogan on the headband. It's not the exact drawing that you have, but it was by a company called Old San Francisco Toy Makers. So what makes me wonder is maybe they did toy with the idea of him wearing Hogan on his head, never did it, but then when he went to WCW, they implemented that type of merchandising.
Well, that is interesting. I did freelance for Original San Francisco Toy Makers for a long time. They were actually started as a spin-off of Galoob. When Galoob closed, then the founder of Galoob started Original San Francisco Toy Makers. But I didn't start freelancing for them until the late 90s. It's possible that this was done then, but they didn't. But you said it wasn't my artwork, so it may be a mystery that is not solved. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. But it's interesting that I have this in my file, and that I have the pattern drawing, and that I have no memory of what it is. But all this stuff happened 30 years ago, and I've designed a lot of toys since then, but Wrestling Buddies are pretty special.
And I'll tell you, I've talked to a lot of people who have been in the toy design process, and I've seen a lot of interviews with toy designers for wrestling stuff. And although it was 30 years ago, you keeping all these records, your timelines and the information that you have, it all lines up. So you saving all that information, those calendars, it really is perfect for refreshing your memory, because even simple things, like you said, you don't know much about wrestling, but the things that you're saying, they all make sense. Now,
Oh, wait a minute. I became quite an expert on wrestling. You have to know
okay,
that.
okay.
And I was able to take my boys to WrestleMania, and there was a lot of wrestling going on in the house that I didn't start knowing too much, but I kept up with it for quite a few years,
did
along
they
with my dog.
did they bring the wrestling buddies to WrestleMania?
Yeah, I'm sure they did.
Now, you said that Hasbro acquired Tonka, Parker Brothers, all that. Some of your designs, fans of these in the wrestling community know about them, were the WWF body slammers. Now, you designed these. They're very, very reminiscent of Hulk Hogan. I believe it's Big Boss Man, Ultimate Warrior, and Jake the Snake. They're very reminiscent of the wrestling buddies, except these are 7.5 inches high, and they have almost like a Super Ball right in the middle. They bounce off the ground. But as you said, Hasbro acquired them. I told you they were featured in like a trade ad as something that was upcoming, but they were never released. Do you want to talk about those?
This is really funny because this all started last night when you and I are talking about things. And I said, do you remember some little wrestlers that had a ball in the center? And you said, oh yes, that's what they were. And I had designed those at the transition period, when after Hasbro had bought us, and we couldn't stop our development just because Hasbro bought us. Our job was to turn over, the 1992, 1991, 1992 line to them, so that they could then run with it and not have to worry about the development. So once it was announced that they were buying us, we didn't just like, okay, we're done. We had to keep working. And so somebody had an idea of doing these little mini wrestlers. And so I created, but I had forgotten about them. I mean, honestly, I had forgotten about them. And so I just kind of on a whim asked you if you knew about them. And when you said yes, then I went back through to my notes and I made a really interesting discovery. I discovered that in addition to the four, you sent me a picture of the four released, the four pre-release that were in the Hasbro's marketing materials, which were Hulk Hogan, I think it was $1 Million Man, Jake the Snake, and Ultimate Warrior.
Not $1 Million Man, it was Big Boss Man.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, Big Boss. Those guys wearing suits, they're all like Big Boss Man, right? And so when I saw those, and I knew right away that it was my artwork, and I knew right away that they didn't just take the artwork from the original buddies and shrink it down, that I had created new artwork, and I remembered it. So I went back to my date book and I made a really interesting discovery. It was mentioned on the promotion piece that Bret Hart and The Undertaker were going to be coming next, but also Sergeant Slaughter. So I had developed and done drawings for Sergeant Slaughter, the Undertaker, and the Hitman. And of course, I was really excited about Bret Hart because he wears pink. And I'm all about pink, right? I do girls' toys.
You get to work pink into your boy line.
Hearts, yes. Hearts and pink. So I was really kind of excited. So people have asked me through the years, before I dug out my date books, what other wrestlers were you considering doing? And, I had a memory of at least one of the Hearts. I was pretty sure I remembered the Undertaker, but I had forgotten about Sergeant Slaughter. So as I went through my date books, and I'm reading really carefully, and it's just, wow. I mean, I'd forgotten about all these things, and it was such an awesome find to discover that I had actually designed 3 of these in addition to the 4 of these body slammers. I had designed 7 of them, but Hasbro, for whatever reason, chose to release only, or they didn't release, but they chose to develop the 4. And perhaps the reception at Toy Fair wasn't outstanding. I mean, it's not unusual for a company to show. They probably took them to Toy Fair in 1992. They, which was after Tonka had closed its doors. They didn't get a good solid reception, and so they just quietly decided to drop them. I mean, that happens more often than you know. So that's my
Absolutely.
guess what happened to those guys.
And I know you said you no longer have the drawings of the Undertaker, Bret Hart, Sergeant Slaughter because you had to turn those over to Hasbro, but you did do drawings of them.
Yes, I did do drawings, and because I have it on my notebook, Drew Sergeant Slaughter all day. So,
Mm-hmm.
I had the drawings, and seeing that photo of those 4 body slammers just brought back a flood of memories of redoing those small drawings, in a little different scale, proportions slightly different, and working on that. But how sad, it was, because at the end of the year of 1991, the calendar is getting emptier and emptier as we're doing outplacement and we're, turning over files, and it was just a really sad time.
Yeah. And uh, the fact that you did these drawings is huge because they're not guaranteed to be lost forever. Because one thing that's amazing about this era of wrestling toys, about the early 90s, a lot of Hasbro stuff, it's 30 years old, but just in the last 10 years, tons of stuff that we had no idea was even being developed that didn't make it to marketing materials has been unearthed. And it's so incredible. So the fact that at least we know that these drawings, they may be somewhere, maybe they were destroyed, who knows, but there's a possibility that they're out there that's huge. And I can just imagine the bright colors on Bret Hart, based on your other things. I just imagine like a hot pink singlet or something. It's incredible though. But earlier in the show, I mentioned that a lot of people have tried to recreate the feel of Wrestling Buddies, and pretty much across the board, wrestling collectors all agree that tons of people have tried and they've all fallen short, because the greatest Wrestling Buddies and wrestling pals are the Tonka ones that you design. But I'm not sure if you're aware, but I wanted to show you a few of the different ones. This is a WCW by Toy Biz. Now it's about the same size, a little bit more slender, and these talk.
The Macho Man Randy Savage.
You could see, you can see they even put like the nose, kind of like yours, the 3D nose. This is just in the past few years. Jack Pacific did these buddies. These are like extremely soft, like almost too soft. But again, they did the nose, the bridge of the nose. Another Jack Pacific one. They tried these. They had bones in them that crack. These were like probably regarded as one of the worst and the failed attempts. And Mattel, even in recent years, did very, very small versions of the buddies. But you can see like the arms are down, they're rounded. They've tried to recreate them, but everybody agrees it's just not been successful since your buddies. So as I told you, I'm a huge fan of this toy line. They mean so much for my childhood and part of what got me into this lifelong hobby of just collecting wrestling toys. Since we're on my computer, I can't turn it to show you, but maybe when we get up and stop, I'll show you how I have all my wrestling buddies lined up in my shelves. But I just wanted to say thank you for all the work that you put into these. Your passion really shined through. Everything you've shown me, it's so impressive, because I mean, all this time, like, I guess I saw your Big Boss Man prototype years ago without the glasses. And I guess I just assumed that it was a printed one. To find out that was hand drawn, it just blew my mind. Now, of course, this is coming from somebody who cannot draw, but it blew my mind. But I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for discussing. Thank you for sharing these things that are just blowing my mind right now. You made my day. But I want people to have the opportunity to connect with you, or at least come in and check out your Instagram, your book. So if you'd like to plug anything, by all means, you can go ahead, and I'll put a little text bar at the bottom of how to follow you. Now, guys, she already said she has a emotional attachment to some of these things. Her son's getting them. Don't go being the $1 million man throwing money at her. Okay. Give her a follow. Check out her book. So go ahead.
Great. I think I'm most active on Instagram. I have an account that's just for my toy design. If you guys like to see things other than wrestlers, I've got lots of cute dolls and dollies and play sets and, things that I've done through the years. I try to balance it out. My Instagram account is called Steph Designs Toys. It's STEF, not PH, Steph Designs Toys. I have a website, Stefanie Eskander Design. And I do have other things in addition to my toys. And because it's not, all encompassing, it's a little bit limited. I also have a book that is actually, so I've sold out, and so I'm in the process of doing a second edition, which I'm hoping to have done by June. So it's called Toy Stories, The Secret Life of a Toy Designer.
Is that you on the cover?
That's me when I worked at Mattel.
That's awesome.
And I have a whole section in here on the Wrestling Buddies and how that got started. So it includes some of my drawings. So just keep an eye. You'll be able to get it through my website, Stefanie Eskander Design. But right now, like I said, it's out of print. So I'll try to have new edition done, which with extra pages done by June. So Steph at Steph Designs Toys, Stefanie Eskander Design, and there you go. That's how you can find me.
Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for coming on here and talking with me.
So there you have it, guys. The complete history of the WWF Wrestling Buddies by Tonka, straight from the mouth of the designer, Stefanie Eskander. Now, if you want to follow Stefanie, you can follow her on Instagram at Steph Designs Toys, STEF Designs Toys. Now, I don't know about you, but I learned so much. She had the complete timeline, unreleased wrestling buddies, unreleased body slammers that were designed that we didn't know if they were actually designed or drawn or submitted. The wrestling mat, the Hogan, just so much stuff. One thing I told her I was going to ask her was who was her favorite wrestling buddy, and I forgot in the video. But once I stopped the video, we were talking off record, and I asked her, and she told me it is the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. Solely, she said, because she got to draw simulated sparkles on his outfit. She is a girl toy designer, and that's what she's into. That's why she was excited about Bret Hart. So hope you guys like this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at FigHeel and at Unreleased Wrestling Figs, as well as Steph Designs Toys. And check out the Pro Wrestling Tees shop, the Unreleased Wrestling Figure coloring books. And keep coming back for more, guys. Have a good one. Peace.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at FigHeel and at Unreleased Wrestling Figs. And you can visit the merch store at Pro Wrestling Tees and check out the Unreleased Wrestling Figure coloring books available now on Amazon.com, including Prime shipping.